What's the most defining relationship you've ever had?
Ooh.
Welcome to the BlackLITE Podcast. We're starting a new interview series we're calling SpotLITE. On this episode of SpotLITE, I'm interviewing our very own Sheldon Roberts. Sheldon and I have known each other for several years. It was great to sit down and record this episode together, especially since we, like so many others, haven't had much opportunity lately to see friends and family. We hope that you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed creating it. Now let's get into it. Welcome to our first SpotLITE episode.
Dude, I'm excited, man.
This is going to be fun.
I'm amped. Do I look amped or do I look nervous?
You look nervous as hell.
Let me shake it out a little bit here. All right.
So let's start off really easy. I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
And we initially bonded over many things, but one of the things we bonded over at the beginning of our friendship was a podcast that we listened to that was called The Art of Charm.
Yeah.
Now is called The Jordan Harbinger Show. Much better name.
Great podcast.
And he talks about a tornado introduction, basically a way of introducing yourself that a layperson would understand who you are and what you do without really needing to know the specifics of your job. Can you give me a quick introduction of like what you do at work outside of your podcast stuff?
Oh man, that's like a total DC question to ask right there. Like the whole,
It
what
is.
do you do?
It is.
Which is what people ask when you can never ask, or you can no longer ask what their major is anymore.
Right.
To start asking what they do. But the short and sweet is I'm in banking. So I've been in banking and payments pretty much my whole adult life. And it has taken me on a journey that I never, ever expected. It wasn't something that I planned on doing. I don't think anybody, is 3 or 4 years old and then says, hey, I want to be a payments expert one day. And somehow that just sort of happened. And I put a lot of time and hard work into it. I don't talk about it too much outside of work because a lot of people don't know what goes on in payments. They typically think that means something like collections, or I have no idea. They're like PayPal, sort of, but understanding how transactions work in an economic system and those different payment methods and things like that. I've spent a lot of time working on stuff like that. So that would be probably the short and sweet of, but I mean, it's been all kinds of things, whether it's, managing client portfolios to one-on-one client satisfaction type things, setting up programs for people so that they can, or for either institutions or organizations to help them accept payments, create payment solutions, all kinds of stuff like that. I've been in general in banking probably for 15 years. So, man, I stop and think about it. It's crazy.
So we've talked previously about, we've talked about pretty much everything because
Oh, yeah.
I've known you for how long?
Wow. I think we're going on, it's been at least 5 or 6 years now. Let's see. I think we met when I was just before I turned 30 and I'm 37 now. So it's six, almost 7 years.
So actually let's dive into that.
Okay.
Tell me about how we first met.
Well, there's 2 stories there. First, we met through your cousin Julian, who was part of the podcast.
Sure.
And so I knew of you, but we didn't actually start hanging out until other person on the podcast, Jason, until his bachelor party. And he invited everybody to Vegas. And I was a little bit of a last minute addition. And you ended up being everybody was staying in separate rooms. And I got there and it just happened to be that we were sharing a room. And I was like, what the heck is Warren doing here? And man, had I known, I think had any of us known, but we were pretty much inseparable on that trip. That was just so exciting.
True.
It was like, the way that I tell the story is anytime I was wanting to do something, you were already on your way to doing it. And anytime that you wanted to do something, I was already on my way to doing it.
Same way. Yep.
And we just fed off that energy the entire trip. And I think you saved my life a couple of times on that trip.
I did.
Got me out of a couple sticky situations where I tried to use you to flex a little too much in Vegas. But yeah, that was, and then after that, man, once we came back home, then it was just like, let's hang out. Let's hang out more and more. And then the next thing you know, we were like almost every weekend and just doing the same stuff and hanging out and trying to, I think one of the cool things for me about that, and I talk about this from time to time, but one of the things for me that was so cool and different and exciting about that is that typically like it's hard for guys to make friends with each other just because it's like, what's the benefit here? You know, like, yeah, I have another guy that I can hang out with, but especially as adults. But then just the way that we relate to one another. And there was never like a conversation that you and I ever had about like, oh, how do you like to talk to people? Or how do I like to be talked to? It just clicked. And I don't think there's ever been a time where you and I have ever like intentionally hurt one another's feelings, you know,
Not that I can think of.
Tried to like show one another up or something like that. Or like, okay, how can I make him look bad? But yeah, I mean, and that just made for a great friendship. And then just continuing, I think I remember, I don't know if I texted you or called you. And like after we've been hanging out for a few months and I was like, dude, you want to take this thing to the next level? And then we ended up moving in together. So, and then a glorious friendship and tons of adventures and stories all from there, man, just so many.
So one of the things that I think brought us together and made us sort of inseparable in that way was this love for figuring out how to grow ourselves either socially or economically or in various different ways. Can you tell me about one of the ways that you've seen yourself grow in the past, I don't know, few years that has really just like would give us a glimpse into who you are today as a person?
Wow. Okay. So I have grown so much over the past, I'll say 10 years or so. And so we want to take really from like 2010 to 2020. I mean, just a transformational shift completely. I mean, people who would have known me from high school for sure, people who would have known me from college, and they're like, I cannot believe that this is the same person. But a lot of that really came from, like you're saying, me just really wanted to try to figure things out. And there were just certain things going on in my life that I started to recognize patterns, especially in relationships or at work and things like that. And I was like, I don't like the direction or where these things are going. And I was just kind of letting life happen to me and then reacting. And eventually I just got to a point where I was like, I need to take control of this situation. Like, this is my life. I only get one of these. And I need to really, I don't need to be in control at all times, but I definitely need to take control of the things that I want to do, the things that are important to me, make sure that I've got a good circle in my life. And so really a lot of that was just that commitment to leveling up. And it's never been for me like totally economic. It's really just being about growing and becoming a better person and trying to figure out honestly what it means to be a good man, and fumbling and stumbling through that and figuring out stuff along the way and having good friends to bounce ideas off of.
So in that fumbling and stumbling, we all, I think, have huge like failure moments where we would say that was a turning point in my life that allowed me to do a leap forward. Can you talk about one of those failure moments for yourself?
You know, I'm glad that you're asking that question. And I was a little nervous about it at first, but I realized that something came to me recently, and it's been just super important for looking back and looking forward. And part of it is just understanding failure. And it turns out that failure is something that we're typically most afraid of. And it actually holds us back from doing the things that we want to do. We dream about things, we think about things, we desire things, we hope for things, but then we're afraid, right? Because we might fail.
Right.
And over time, not only have I watched myself, but others and people become successful and realize that failure is actually part of the process. And so for me, once I started embracing that more, then it became easier for me to navigate through situations. It was just like, oh, I failed. Okay. All right. Let me look at the pieces. Let me look at the landscape and then assess, make any adjustments, and then move forward. I would say that probably the biggest one looking back, and a lot of our listeners probably don't know about this, especially depending on when you met me, but I was actually married once. And for a short period of time, it was right before you and I met and started hanging out.
Yeah.
So I was probably around 28. And that lasted until I was almost 30. So a little less than 2 years. And I like to talk about that as a failure. And not because I want to be hard on myself, but because it didn't work out because we were not right for each other. But it was important for me to look at that and say, what can I do differently moving forward? Right. And that's actually taken a lot of time. One, because I didn't deal with that at the time. I just kind of moved forward and was like, whatever. After I had really sought help in a few areas, I realized, you know what, I need to address this. And so really taking a look at that and diving into what that relationship did to me and added for me and took away from me, it was easy for me to then take that situation where, you know, for all intents and purposes, I failed. And I said, you know, this was a promise that I made to somebody that I wasn't able to keep. And that was frustrating and hurtful, and it hurt me. And there were a lot of things going on at that time, but I would say that being able to work through that, and understand my own worth and my own value, just how much I bring to people's lives and how just valued I am, it really restored that in me. And I don't think that I would have gone through that in that way. So I always kind of try to look for that silver lining, even when things are kind of at their worst.
Yeah. I mean, the way that you take failure situations and sort of take yourself out of them and go, okay, I've recognized that I've failed. Let me look at the situation and go, what could I do differently next time? What should I have done this time? How do I edit the way that I interact with these situations? And then you take that, and when you get hit with that situation again, we'll talk about it. We'll say, this is just like such and such a situation.
Oh yeah.
And let me not do that thing this time. It's been such a clear show of growth. And it's something that I really admire about you, and the way that I've been able to see your walk through the past, 6 or 7 years. It's been really neat to be along that ride with you.
Yeah, it's definitely been a ride for sure.
Oh my gosh.
And I think that, just to kind of put a little bow on that, I think that part of becoming comfortable with failure has just been because I've gotten so good at it. But I say
it takes practice.
It really does. It takes practice. But then when you're no longer really afraid of that, you can really just put your whole self forward and just say, this is me. Here I am. Not necessarily take it or leave it, but this is really who I am. You can accept me or you can move along. And for me, just growing and continuing to grow and challenging myself and saying, you know, I'm good in this area. I can hang out for a little while here, but then start to work on other things, and just keep doing that, and just keep making lots of mistakes and keep learning from them and keep growing.
Well, one of the things that you've been working on more recently, I'd say in the past, 2 years, has been your swimming. And then that morphed into being a triathlete. Can you tell us about the journey that you went on with, basically not being able to swim to then being an avid part of the DC triathlete organizations?
Scene, the whole thing there. Yeah, man, that's a wild story. I'm going to try to keep that real brief, but basically, and I'm not sure which version of the story you want me to tell, but I had never really heard about triathlon until I met someone who was into triathlon, and she really motivated me and kind of inspired me to try to do something that I didn't think that I was able to do. And that was for various reasons. And I really was like, you know what? I want to do something really difficult that's going to take real effort and that I'm probably going to suck at. And I had a background in running. I ran track in high school. I had a bike. I had, been mountain biking and road biking a little bit here and there recreationally. So I was like, okay, I've sort of got two of these three pieces. What do I want to do here? But swimming was, I could get in the water and kind of splash around and float-ish. But as far as like being able to swim to the end of the pool and back, that was out of the question. But I was really committed to that, and I really wanted to do something, like I said, that was really difficult and something that I just didn't know how to do. And I just kept at it. And I said, when I first got in the pool, I was like, I am really bad at this. And I watched a bunch of videos. I talked to people. I studied a bunch of stuff, read things, asked a bunch of questions. And then eventually I was able to do a lap, and that seemed pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then I challenged myself after that, and I was like, well, let me see if I can do 2 laps. So it turned into 2 laps,
right.
5 laps, 10 laps. And at some point, the laps didn't matter anymore. I was, swimming for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour or longer. And it was really exciting to see that. Like, swimming became like my favorite thing to do. I would get off work and just go jump in the pool and just swim. And then the next day I'd be right back in the pool. So to really conquer that, I don't talk about it too much in a big way, but it was a really big accomplishment to be able to go from not being able to do that to really being confident in being able to do that. I remember one of the races that I did, the first race that I did, I was at the very back of the swim start for a triathlon. It starts with the swim. And I was at the very back. And a few races later, I was at the very front, just super confident, ready to just jump right in the water and go. I mean, you can start with upwards of 50 to 100 people or more all at the same time, splashing around and doing all this other stuff. So to be able to go from zero to hero was kind of cool. And I look back on that, and it was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of hard work, and I sacrificed a lot, but I wouldn't trade that for anything. And just the stories along the way, the confidence that I found in myself, the knowingness, the ability to do great things in small steps, I think became such a moving force for me. And just saying, I can do stuff that I didn't think that I could do. I just got to stick to it and keep at it. And I'm going to fail a bunch of times, but I'll get there.
I would assume that you're probably one of very few Black men at any given triathlon event. Is that the case?
That would be a fair statement to make. I've never been at a race where I've been the only Black person, but I've definitely felt it where it's like, wow, okay, there's only a few Black people here. And I've seen a couple of clubs where they have like a majority of Black participants, which I appreciate. There have definitely been events that I've shown up to, different, not a race, but like just smaller group events and things like that, where of course I've been the only Black person, and this is not uncommon for me in my everyday life and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, as far as being the only Black person, I think part of that, my initial kind of foray into triathlon, I was doing a lot of that on my own, training, running, swimming, hiking. And then eventually I decided to join a group, which is the DC Triathlon Club. And there really couldn't have been a more welcoming group. I mean, definitely a diverse group. Obviously, I mean, minorities in triathlon, that's always going to be just a small percentage. And I could write a dissertation on why that is, but we've got other things to talk about.
Let's talk about the podcast for a second.
Yeah.
You and I had the idea actually to start a podcast sort of similar to this 2 years ago, maybe, maybe last year. And it never really got off the floor until Julian came to us and said, hey, you remember that podcast idea? Yeah. Why don't we do that thing? Can you tell me a little bit about what brought you to the idea that you wanted to share in a public forum what the BlackLITE Podcast shares?
Absolutely. So it wasn't one piece. There was a bunch of pieces that sort of wanted to come together. One, it really did start from our conversations.
Mhm.
I mean, we were experiencing so many different things. We'd go out every weekend, we meet new people and new stories, new adventures, stuff to come back and download and parse out and uh, what would we call it? Like debrief, if you will, and just basically say like we would go out and then on the way home, we would parse out every situation, who we met, when we met them, how
Mhm.
we met them, what conversation we had, what we liked, what we didn't like, what could have gone better the next time. How do we do things like meet people and get them to hang out with us once? How do we do something like meet people and get them to hang out with us twice? How do we make acquaintances, friends, and all these different things? So all of that was swirling. And we were trying to like, I just remember trying to figure out like, we need to record this stuff. Like this is valuable information that we
Right.
have and someone will benefit from this. And really we would have benefited greatly from recording so many of those conversations. And so it started there. And then a number of other things that we've already talked about on the podcast, the situation where the girl at the bar who was a lawyer
Oh gosh.
who said that she could help you because she was white and you're black and she was a lawyer. And just talking about blackness in general and what that means, how the world sees me, how the world sees you, how we self-identify.
Mhm.
And I think that just our own backgrounds of both our moms being white, our dads being black, and having that connection and talking about what that's like. And especially even seeing those differences. I think we have an episode on deck called light skin privilege and just talking
Right.
about like those things and the difference in lighter and darker skinned black people. And that gave us the idea to put something together. And we are like, hey, let's do a podcast like two mixed guys. And I think we recorded some audio for that too, like
We did.
a few hours of audio. We were trying to play around with some things. And just from our conversations that we had out, we were really having just like a good dialogue. And we wanted to keep that going. I felt like we had a good foundation, but didn't really know how to get it off the ground, like you're saying, or
Right.
where to go with it.
Mhm.
And then I told Julian about it, and he was like, dude, you would be amazing on a podcast. And if you want to meet up and like talk about like how to start one, I'm glad to help you do that. And so he and I met up for a happy hour one night, and he was like, he basically was my champion and my cheerleader. He's
Right.
like, dude, let's do a podcast. And then it got to the point where you should do a podcast. Then it got to the point where he was like, well, let's all do one. And because at that time he was actually working on another podcast project.
Right.
And when that tapered off, then he was like, I want to do something else. And then he brought me in, brought you in, brought Jason in. And
He really is the great connector.
he really is the connector, man. If you want to be connected, get with Julian. But yeah. So that was how that kind of took off. And then that's how everything came together. For me, I was always nervous about just sharing these types of things in a public forum where people
Mhm.
can listen and it's recorded and go back to it and, send me a message and say, hey, I heard you say this thing.
Mm.
And a big part of that was like, what if it does something to affect my job? What if it does something to affect my friendships? What if it does something to affect my family or, relationships or anything like that? And I really wanted to avoid that. But once I dug into it a little deeper, I realized I'm just scared. I was just afraid to put myself out there. And really all of us working on it together and really just kind of motivating each other and being like, oh, that was great. Excellent work with this. I mean, really, we've all been kind of just pushing each other forward on it. It's been really exciting to see us grow, as producers, as tech guys, as, just tinkerers and just trying to figure this thing out in real time. And it's been an absolute blast.
Is there a piece of feedback on the podcast that has really just like boosted you more than everything else that you've heard?
A couple.
What's that?
So the first is actually just about our group chemistry.
Mhm.
And I think each of us have gotten feedback about that specifically, where
Right.
someone has said, I love your guys' chemistry on the podcast. Like usually it takes folks, weeks, months, years to develop that. What are you guys doing to make it so authentic and so original? Like we're friends.
We're like, well, we spent years with each other.
Yeah, we know each other very well. We've had these conversations before. We're expanding on them now. It's easy for us. Like we're not faking. Like this is what we would be talking about. This is how we would talk about it.
Right.
So it makes it really easy to do that. So that's one. Just knowing that people listen to it is pretty cool. And I just thought like maybe some friends and family would listen to it, but to get messages from people all over the world saying, hey, I listened to your podcast. It's great. I never knew that this existed. I'd like to learn more about it. People saying that they listen to it, on their morning run or walk. Like, that's been pretty cool. And I think but the most boosted one out of all of them is I've gotten a few compliments or some comments saying that I've got a sexy voice. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to keep that going. Maybe bring the bass down a little low. We'll see what happens.
You bring it down too much lower, it's just going to taper off out of
clip out.
Yeah, it's going to go out in the edit. We'll just hear rumbling in our chests, and then someone will be like, oh, that's a good point. So I wanted to take it back to something you said earlier about us going out and figuring out how to maneuver socially and figure out what works and what doesn't when we're trying to talk to groups of people and things like that. And I remember this one specific, I'd say week, maybe 2 weeks, where we just decided that names were important. Can you tell me what we discovered during that time?
So, man, I mean, this is first and foremost, learning names and remembering names is a skill. Like, a lot of people think that there's just like a natural knack for it. And some people just have better memories than others, but just knowing people's names and using them. I mean, we're talking about a conversational game changer, because you can direct the conversation. You can guide people. You can compliment people. There's so many things you can do with names. And I remember, I think we were listening to a podcast, and there was a little bit of advice on how to remember people's names. And it was something along the lines of, just pretend for a second that somebody came to you and said, all right, you're going into this scenario. Maybe it's a bar, maybe it's a public situation, maybe it's a meeting room, whatever it is. And if you can remember everyone's name in the room that you meet, I'll give you $10,000. Well, that's kind of a motivator to remember some people's names, because now you've got $10,000 riding on that.
Right.
And I treat every interaction just like that, is that it's important to remember people's names, because names are important. That's really the moral of the story, if you will, is that names are important, because really people love to hear the sound of their own name. And then just as a conversational piece, you can really direct the conversation in any way just by using people's names. And whether it's using nicknames, whether it's using their full name in a situation where people normally wouldn't use their full name. I mean, there's so many things that you can do with people's names. And I made it a conscious thing for me until it became second nature.
Right. Do you have any nicknames that are out and about in the world that people call you?
I do. Let's see. My first nickname came from my brother, which is just Shell in general. And then people call me that from time to time.
Classic brother, kind of just shorten the name.
Just shorten the name, and there it is. But my favorite nickname is actually Shelly. I just adore that, just to no end. My sister was the first person who started calling me Shelly, and I just was like, I like that. And it just, I don't know, it just kind of, it almost like softened me a little bit, where it was like, okay, it's not Sheldon, it's Shelly. And I don't know what it was about that, but I always took to that. And I love when she did that. And so, like, when other people call me Shelly, like, I always let them know. I was like, my favorite people in the world call me Shelly.
You mentioned softening up. Is there a time in your life that you feel like you softened up much more? Because you and I, and then Julian and Jason have all shared a lot of really raw and vulnerable things on the podcast that I don't hear usually on podcasts of Black men.
Oh yeah.
Is there a moment that you can pinpoint, or a time that you saw sort of the walls that society builds coming off of you so that you could share things like that on a public forum?
Yeah. So one of the first times that I became aware of how tied to my emotions that I am, I'm not going to say I was, that I am, is when I was going through a situation where it was basically like a breakup. And the only way I knew how to relate that, like, to the world was that I was angry. And I was so like, I would say mean things, do mean things. And then I just remember, I think maybe we had a conversation,
Yeah.
but it was basically along the lines of, is anger the emotion that you're really feeling right now? Or are you using that to like cover something up? Now, most men don't talk about this stuff in general. So this is like a huge bonus. Like, like to have another guy to be able to talk to about stuff like that and be genuine and honest about it. And that's when I started to like scratch the surface and realize that in that moment, I wasn't actually angry. I was hurt, but I was too proud to admit that. And cause I didn't want to be hurt by the situation. I wanted to be able to move through it. I want to be like, I don't care. It's whatever. I'm angry. This person, they ain't shit. And it turned out that I was hurt. I was sad. I was disappointed. I was let down. All kinds of things. A lot of that reflected back at myself. And in that, I realized that there isn't just a singular or two like emotions. It's not just like happy and mad. Right. There's a whole, and I talk about this on the podcast as much as I can, there's a whole range of human emotion. And I think that it's just so important to be able to experience and express that. Like, I understand why we hide behind so many of the masks. I get that. I'm a master at that. But when you start to take those off and you recognize them and you're like, you know what? I don't need that in this situation. Like, I'm just going to be myself. And however it shakes out at the end, that's who I know is supposed to be like in my life. So I would say that just being able to identify like emotions as they are, as opposed to covering them up with anger, has really helped to change the way that I approach situations, change the way that I think about things, and change the way that that things affect me and how I emote with the world.
Now, we've talked a little bit about your dating situations or previous relationships romantically. I don't think it's going the way that you think it's going.
All right.
And we've also briefly touched on family.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you, what's the most defining relationship that you've ever had?
Ooh, put me on the spot. So there are probably two ways that I would look at this, and I do think about this pretty regularly. So from a non-romantic relationship, I would have to say it is my relationship to my father. Mm-hmm. And a big part of that was really just me becoming my own man. And the short and sweet of it is, as a kid, I always looked up to my dad and I always wanted to be just like him. And when I found out that I was not the same person as my father, it really threw me for a loop. And so I really had to dig into that and figure out, okay, how do I make my own path and become my own man? And I think that my dad and I don't agree about a lot of things, but that's good because we challenge each other. Like, we challenge each other's minds. There's just so many things with that. Who he is to me. It is definitely the most defining relationship in my life and had the most impact for various reasons. I could talk for hours and hours and hours about that.
Of course.
Man, how about the most defining romantic relationship that I have ever been in? Man, I would like to give credit to like a bunch of people because I feel like I take like pieces from each one. I try to learn more and be like, okay, don't make that mistake again, even though I'm like expert level at making mistakes. There are, I want to say this in a few different ways. So I have learned, or I've kind of set this up in a way that I look at life as sort of like a video game. And I look at each year as a level. And for me, part of beating the game is leveling up. And so I consider myself right now, I'm 37 years old. I consider myself to be on level 37. And in life, you will find regular characters. You will find mini bosses, and you will find main quest big bosses. And some of them can be real easy to move through, and others can be very, very difficult to defeat. And what I found is that if you do not defeat these mini bosses and main bosses at the earlier levels, they will come back either in their original form or
this is not my final form. Is that where you're going?
in a more terrifying form at a later level, but you won't have the experience to deal with them at the later level. This is
right.
This is what I have been working on trying to avoid. I've learned a lot from relationships, made a lot of mistakes, learned how to share and communicate things with people, and learned that even though I'm a great communicator, it's important for me to be a great communicator in relationships, which I still work on. But I really just try to kind of open myself up now to be more in tune with people and what they need, and really just kind of try my best to be that. And I know that I'm dancing around the question. I know I'm dancing around the overall question.
A little bit.
There have been some special people in my life for sure, which have changed the way that I look at relationships and that I understand love. And I think that I will say that one of my closest friends, she taught me how to love someone even when you can't be with them. And that for me was like a game changer, because like I'm such an emotional and passionate person that like if I want something or if I am excited about something, I'm just full, like 100%. There's no backup plan. Let's go get this thing. And I believe in myself. Like totally.
Yeah, you're straight Icarus. Just flying off into the sun.
Just flying off into the sun is a good way to say that for sure. But life is quite the teacher. And, I have found that I will not always get everything that I want. All of the people that I want in my life will not always be there. And I think that for me, that's helped to change the way that I look at friendships, look at relationships, and how I value things, and to really, really lean into those and say, like, this isn't like this person sharing their time and their thoughts and their emotions with me. This isn't par for the course. This is meaningful. And like, it's important for me to share that with other people, like give them that, because that's what I want. Like, I value my time. I value my thoughts. I value my expressions and my emotions. And when I share those with other people, it's important to me. And it hurts me when people don't see that, or they don't respect that, or they're like, oh, this is just like another person. And I'm like, I can't. Like, you can't be around me then. How about that? So yeah, that's how I'll answer that question. Lots of different relationships, some great, some not so great, but they've all really helped me to grow into the person that I am, and help me to continue to grow as I'm, always learning and hoping to be, like I said, just a better man.
It's a great answer. As we start to close up the interview, I want to bring it a little bit back toward BlackLITE and talk about something that I don't think we've addressed on the show thus far, especially since it's more of a personal question in terms of how you deal with being mixed. And I just wanted to ask you, how do you self-identify when it comes to your race? Because I have a different way of saying this than you do in terms of being mixed and what that means for me and what that means for you. I just wanted to get your take on who you are racially.
Yeah. So like, that's one of the cool things. And I think it's just one of the best questions to ask, is like how you self-identify, because it's so important, because there are two things going on. There's the way that the world sees you, and then the way that you see yourself in the world. And for me, like, I know my family, and I know like the genetic makeup of my family, and I can't distance myself from that in any way.
Right.
I know that the world sees me as a black man. I get that. At the same time, I self-identify as being mixed, because now that doesn't change the way that I walk through the world as a black man, but I self-identify as being mixed because I feel like I can't deny who I am and where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
So I know and I see like and accept that the world sees me as a black man, and I identify as being a black man through that lens. But as far as how I self-identify, it's like all of the things that who I am and what makes me up, how I speak, how I hang out, what I like to do, what I'm into, those aren't based on race, but those are definitely based on the things that I've grown up with, the things that I've liked, how I have related to other people, the relationships that I've had. So, for me, that's what's most natural when it comes out. Like if somebody asks, it's like I'm mixed, but I would tell people that confidently. At the same time, and I want to kind of expand this just a little bit. I do remember when I used to meet people and I would tell them that my mom was white or that I was mixed as some sort of hope for acceptance. Especially when I was like out meeting white women, not sure like what they're into, like I did down with the brown kind of stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, my mom's white. Like, because there's no doubt about it, man. Like whatever way we want to cut it, man, there's certain folks who they're like, once they see you as like not their stereotype, then they start to open up to you.
Yeah.
And when I look back on that, I'm not ashamed of that, but I certainly wouldn't do it anymore. That was definitely a learning and a growth thing for me, because I want to be able, like, there's nothing wrong. Like I would tell anybody that my mom is white.
Of course.
But there's no reason for me to use that in conversation as some sort of crutch to have like somebody like me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't do that anymore.
Well, Sheldon, thank you for sitting here and letting me grill you with questions.
Dude, this has been awesome.
As a parting remark, is there anything that you want to say to our lovely listeners that are watching this or listening to this as we end the interview?
Yeah. I would just say, I always try to be just positive and upbeat, and I'm not going to be so generic to say that, if we could start a podcast, then anybody could do it. It does take quite a bit of work and effort and things like that. But I do encourage people to chase their dreams. I mean, it's what we've got, it's what we wake up in the morning with. It's what we go to bed in the evening with. And if there's something that you're afraid of, it turns out that everything that you want in life is just on the other side of fear. And so that's what I would encourage people about that. That's what I've started to really embrace. It's terrifying. It doesn't necessarily get easier, but you start to have more tools to deal with it, I think. And just moving outside of that, it just makes for better humans. So, and I'm about that.